INTP. That's the result that I got from this little online personality test that you may have heard of called 16 Personalities. Now, I know what you're thinking. Come on, an online personality test? Yeah, I know, I'm usually pretty skeptical of these things too, especially when it seems like the answers are pretty vague and can be applied to pretty much anybody in one way or another. But when I read what these 5 simple letters mean, I realized that I resonated with them a lot and that they were not just some generic descriptions. Instead, they really described many of the unique little quirks about my personality that throughout my life kind of separated me from other people. And it also shed some light onto how these quirks could actually be unique strengths under the right conditions. And so in this video, I wanted to simply share what it means to be an INTP. Now, 2 quick things I feel I should add before we begin. The first is that no personality test completely defines who you are. People and personalities are not simply black and white, and everyone lies on a seemingly infinite spectrum between 2 absolute extremes. But that's besides the point. If something resonates with you and can simply serve as a starting point for further self-reflection and exploration, then that's a pretty valuable thing in my opinion. The second thing is that because they share the same letters, the 16 personality test looks very similar to another well-known test you may have heard of called the Myers-Briggs test. I won't get into the weeds too much there, but it is interesting to do your own research about the distinction between the 2. Okay, so INTPs. I is for introverted. Usually people think of introverts as shy and quiet, while extroverts are confident and loud. But that's not actually a very accurate characterization. These 2 personality traits really describe how someone generally gets energized. Introverts, like myself, tend to get more enjoyment out of solitary activities and can get exhausted by social interactions fairly quickly. Extroverts, on the other hand, tend to enjoy group activities and get energized by social interaction. Now, contrary to what many people initially think, both of these types of people can be charismatic, confident, or talkative, at least for a short period of time. Energy is really the main thing here, and it's something that I've always kind of struggled with for my whole life. As an introvert, I get energy from being alone and being in my own thoughts. And although I can be social, I can speak in front of an audience, I can approach strangers and start a conversation, and I love getting together with friends, I do quickly lose energy from being around other people, and I soon feel the need to go off on my own in order to recharge my batteries. In group settings, I can turn up the energy for a short period of time, but at some point, very quickly, I can get very quiet and low energy because as I quickly become socially exhausted, I kind of without even thinking about it, go into this kind of energy conservation mode. When I do get that alone time, it may take me an hour or 2 before I feel like talking to anyone again, or as I've come to realize recently, it often takes multiple days before I'm fully recharged. So a great way to highlight this is through an experience I had living with a roommate. He was always known to be this very life of the party kind of guy. His happiness came from bringing a lot of friends together, sharing food and drinks, and constantly making people laugh. We got along great, but when it came time to living together, our differences became a little less complementary and a little more challenging because of just how much of an introvert I am and how much of an extrovert he is. For example, after a long day of work and sitting in traffic, we would each come home pretty tired. Now, when I would walk through the door, I couldn't wait to unwind, relax, and recharge by going into my room, playing my guitar for an hour, watching some soccer highlights on my laptop, or researching some topics that were interesting to me. I could easily be in my room for an hour before I felt like coming out and even thinking about chatting or sharing a drink. Now, my friend, on the other hand, would come home from a long day of work and sitting in traffic, and he couldn't wait to unwind, relax, and recharge as well. But for him, this meant chatting in the kitchen, making dinner together, watching a show, and sharing a drink. He would get irritated when I would just go and hide in my room for the night, and I would get irritated when he would try to pull me away from what I was doing in order to talk. While we were both tired from a long day, he got energy from interacting with his roommate, and it was almost depressing for him to just be alone in his room. Meanwhile, I got energy from being by myself, and it felt like more work to go out and socialize once I got home. Now, one thing I've realized is that once I've had a lot of time to myself, I naturally end up thinking more about people in my life and reflecting on my relationships. I start thinking of creative ways to connect more and how I can be of service to others. In the case of my roommate, having that alone time would allow me to reflect on our differences and the ways in which we could bridge that gap. But until I got that alone time, my resulting moodiness often leads me to just think a bit more selfishly about getting space for myself and the things that I need. So in essence, I may need a lot of personal space and time, but when I do have that in my life, I find ways to use my strengths and connect with others. N is for intuitive. This one explains how we see the world and process information. Intuitive individuals are described as very imaginative, open-minded, and curious. They prefer novelty over stability and focus on hidden meanings and future possibilities. This one really comes out in my personality in the way that I love conversations about the future, how things could be, the psychology behind why people do the things that they do, and the more abstract or nuanced aspects of life. I get bored pretty quickly with conversations that revolve solely around the here and now, as in what happened during someone's day, what someone is saying about somebody else, or how someone's wedding plans are coming along, or just simply observing what's going on in the room at this very moment. These are the conversations that people towards the other end of the spectrum are more drawn to, people of the observant type. Those with the observant style are more interested in the observable facts and more straightforward outcomes. They prefer to avoid layering too much interpretation on what they see. I feel like during these more straightforward conversations, my mind just can't help but to try to steer the conversation to some kind of bigger topic, like what actually makes for a productive day or a fulfilling life, what someone's actions say about the current state of our society, whether we should change the way we even view marriage, or how the 16 personalities test can describe a particular person. Like, I can't help it. And I know that some people hate that. I think it annoys some people because it feels very unnecessary, complicated, analytical, and outside of the present moment. And I do have to admit that this is one huge drawback to this particular characteristic and to myself. It makes it more difficult to just stay in the present moment and instead pulls me towards always thinking of things that aren't actually happening. It makes it difficult to empathize and to show compassion for others because my mind automatically just jumps towards solutions to problems or the deeper meaning behind something instead of just focusing on what someone is expressing and feeling right in this very moment. It can also lead to a kind of impracticality, since it can bring about a head in the clouds kind of personality, where you're always thinking about possible futures and theories, but not focusing on practical solutions in the here and now. Conversely, observant personalities don't want to theorize as much. They simply want to get things done. Their energy is very hands-on, in the sense of working on real things in real time. Spending a lot of time sitting around and pondering possibilities just doesn't cut it for them. But still, I think the intuitive trait that I have can lead to a kind of creativity, innovation, and open-mindedness, because it does allow you to think outside the box, to get excited about possible futures, to ask questions that other people aren't asking, and to be mindful that we could be wrong about things that we think we know. Now, one thing I do appreciate about this trait is that it encourages me to never accept something as either black or white, but instead to always question how something fits into an infinite spectrum of gray. I really like that idea. Especially as we get older, I think humans have this tendency to desperately want to separate things into neatly organized categories. It lets us feel like we've grown wiser and have a better understanding of the world around us when we make judgments on things like what constitutes good versus bad, how we should go about solving problems in our society, what happens to us when we die, or what it means to be successful in life. But the older that I get, the more I feel like there is no clearly right or wrong answer to pretty much any question. Any one answer could be right for you, but not right for somebody else. It could be right today, but not right a year from now. Or the answer could be a mix of whatever two opposing ideas you are considering. T is for thinking. This trait dives further into how we make decisions and cope with our emotions. Thinking types like myself focus more on objectivity and rationality, prioritizing logic over emotions. Now, I already mentioned how the intuitive part of my personality can sometimes make it challenging to empathize and relate to others in the present moment. But I'm also a thinking type, which means I definitely tend to lead more with my mind than my heart. As written on the 16 Personalities website, when presented with a decision, people with the thinking trait typically lean on objective information. They generally manage their relationships by employing fairness and effectiveness as their primary method of dealing with others. Thinking types are often uncomfortable with emotions because emotions can feel messy, unpredictable, unreliable, and biased. But I've also slowly come to recognize that putting logic on a pedestal might not be the best way to live life either. Recent relationships in my life have shown me the value in leading with your heart and caring about people's emotions, including my own emotions. I've met people that seem to have such an easy time connecting to and building trust with others because they feel before they think, and they care deeply about how someone else feels and what that other person is going through, rather than just the objective truth of the matter. I've also realized that humans are inherently emotional creatures, which means that it's a part of us that needs to be expressed alongside our logic and reason. And avoiding or suppressing our emotions oftentimes just creates a pressure cooker within us that usually has a way of spilling out our emotions in unintended or even toxic ways. And actually, I think that one trap that thinking types can easily get into is believing that they are operating under logic and reason alone, when in reality, they may actually be following their emotions. I see this a lot in our political conversations. People from both sides can think that they're just being purely objective and rational, but talking to them makes it super obvious that they're actually very much influenced by feelings of fear, uncertainty, outrage, disgust, and anger. Again, this happens on both sides of the aisle. Of course, the benefit of being a thinking type is that it can help you separate your subjective emotions from a situation and then try to look at things from a more neutral and unbiased perspective. And so, even though I'm trying to learn to lead more with my heart, this trait is something that I really do appreciate about myself. P is for prospecting. This aspect reflects on our approach to work, planning, and decision making. The two types in this category are prospecting and judging, and as explained on the website, they answer questions like the following. Do you prefer spontaneity or certainty? Do you feel more comfortable acting only with all your ducks neatly lined in a row? Or does a certain amount of flexibility or chaos excite you and prove motivating? Do you need more choices or fewer? Now, I'm more of a prospecting type. I don't typically need a high level of certainty, which I think is evident by my time living in a car or my love for solo travel. And I like having a lot of choices before working to narrow things down from there. I'm also not particularly neat or orderly at home, and a little bit of chaos on my desk is a sign that my mind is running and I don't want to lose my train of thought by bringing everything back to this state of order just for the sake of looking organized. One of the biggest downsides to prospecting, I think, is that all this opportunism, choice, openness, and lack of organization can lead to slow decision making and a lack of conviction and focus because there are just so many other options to choose from and things are just so flexible. And combine that with my thinking trait, which tries to look at all the facts, and my intuitive trait that likes to explore all the possible future outcomes and strays away from just one right or wrong answer, and you have a fantastic recipe for analysis paralysis. Compare that to the judging type, where decisions are often made based on order, tradition, how things have always been, or how things are simply supposed to be. Life can sometimes just be more simple to navigate when you give yourself less room to deviate from the norm. But despite all that, the prospecting personality trait does lend itself to a kind of adaptability. There's more of a go with the flow kind of mentality and a sense of improvisation to life. Creative solutions can be found because you're not so beholden to rigid structures and ways of doing things. Living in a car, for example, was not something that I did because I was down on my luck and I had no choice. Something that I definitely wanted to make clear because I don't want to take away anything from people that actually are in that situation, but rather I saw it as a unique way to lower my expenses and save money, to practice getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, to be flexible in where I live and what I do, and to focus my mind on things that are more important to me than a cushy, overpriced apartment. T is for turbulent. Lastly, unlike the Myers-Briggs test, 16 personalities adds one more letter to the end of the equation, and that is either T for turbulent or A for assertive. Turbulent basically means that you're less assured of yourself and your abilities. There's this overarching sense of self-consciousness. Obviously, this can have a lot of downsides since it further exacerbates my issues with indecisiveness, uncertainty, and taking a long time to get started on things. The thing that I think can be most positive from this trait, however, is that it helps me to maintain a sense of humility. Growing up, I've had a number of adults in my life that have shown me the negative sides of being too sure of yourself, too prideful, and too infallible. I've seen how it can make one become more closed-minded and stubborn. I'm really fearful of becoming that way, but I can see those things arise in my own personality sometimes, and so I try really hard to always keep that in check. Someone once said a quote that I really resonated with, which goes something like, "I never want to congeal into my final self." I love it because that word congeal beautifully illustrates that fear I have of being so certain of who I am that I become rigid and stale and cold. And so that's the tightrope that I seem to walk, balancing between self-righteousness and self-defeating, and trying to find that sweet spot in the middle with confidence and humility. So that is what being an INTP is like for me. Again, I don't take this personality test to be the ultimate summation of exactly who I am, but especially in recent years during the pandemic, all the uncertainty, changing of careers, and changing of lifestyles, this has just been a really helpful tool for me to reflect on who I've become so far, how I relate to others, my strengths, my weaknesses, and ways in which I think I can grow. Essentially, it's put language to a lot of the things that I've subconsciously known about myself, but didn't really have an organized way of thinking about or explaining. If you want to try the 16 personalities test for yourself, I'll put a link to it down below in the description. Let me know what result you get and whether or not you resonate with it. I know sometimes people take it and they feel like it just doesn't fit with them at all, and that's okay. One interesting thing to keep in mind though is that you're supposed to answer the questions based on how you typically are or have been in the past, not how you would like to see yourself in the future. Anyways, I love talking about this stuff, so let me know what results you got. Until then, thanks so much for hearing me out, and I will see you next time.